Montana Territory, 1879. The wind carried grit across the dry main street of Red Bluff as the auction bell rang out for the second time that day. And Zinnia Valler stood on the wooden platform with her wrists clenched in front of her, not by rope, but shame. She was 22, the daughter of a failed cattleman, and the last thing her father ever did before disappearing into a bottle for good was sign a note of debt and barter her name to clear it. "Sold," the banker barked, his voice loud and proud like he had just bought a new horse instead of a woman. "To Mr. Ellery White for $1,000. Zineia didn't flinch. She had already flinched too much. Her blue dress was plain, her boots cracked, and her jaw tight. She looked past the banker, past the leering crowd, and fixed her gaze on nothing. Ellery White, a man with a gut like a barrel and hands that lingered too long, stepped forward with a grin. "I will treat her real fine," he said with a laugh to the crowd. "She will be a fine hostess." Zineia stepped off the platform slowly, every movement measured. No one would see her cry. Not again, but someone did move. A shadow broke from the edge of the saloon awning across the street. A man on horseback dismounted in one smooth drop and started toward her. He wore a trail-dusted coat, a wide hat pulled low. His chestnut mare followed him like she trusted him more than the air. He was tall, lean but strong, and silent as he crossed the street. People started muttering. "Nevan Jude," someone said near the barber's post. "That's Nevan Jude." Zinnia's eyes flicked to him, confused. She didn't know his name. Ellery's face twisted. "This ain't your business, cowboy." Nevan didn't stop. He stepped between Zinnia and the banker and looked down at her hands. Then, just as quiet as the wind, he reached out and took her hand. "You're not property," he said. Zinnia blinked, uncomprehending. His hand was warm, steady. Ellery stepped forward. "She was sold fair. I signed the note. She belongs to me now." "No," Nevan said, his voice calm but final. "She does not." Ellery's hand moved to his belt, but Nevan was faster. He turned, knocked the pistol free, and drove his fist into the banker's face. Ellery dropped like a sack of flour. The crowd gasped. No one moved. Zinnia didn't either. She just stared at Nevan. He turned back to her. "Do you want to come with me?" She hesitated. "I won't make you," he said, softer now, "but I will make sure no one ever buys you again." Zinnia looked at the banker groaning in the dust, then at the crowd who had done nothing, then at Nevan who had done everything. She nodded. He helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. "Hold on." She did. They rode out of Red Bluff with the sun behind them and nothing but open land ahead. No one followed. They rode until dusk, until the land opened into hills and the cottonwoods leaned over a stream. Nevan dismounted, helped her down, and started a small fire. He unsaddled the mare, handed Zineia a blanket, and sat across from her without asking questions. She stared into the fire, then looked up. "Why did you do that?" "Because I hate men who think they can buy a woman like she is a mule," he said simply. Zinnia pulled the blanket tighter. "You do not even know me." He looked across the fire. "I know enough." They did not speak again that night, but the silence held no weight. It just stretched between them like something being built. In the morning, Zinnia helped him pack the saddle, her hands efficient. She had grown up on a ranch. She knew her way around horses. Nevan did not hover, but he noticed. They rode west. By the third day, she finally asked, "Where are we going?" "I have land near the Madison River." "A cabin. It is quiet." She nodded. When they reached his land, Zinnia blinked in surprise. The cabin was small, but it stood firm against the wind, and behind it, the land rolled green and wide, with a garden already planted and chickens pecking near a shed. "You live here alone," he nodded. "Since my brother died. I am sorry." He did not say anything for a moment. "Then he left me the land. I built the rest." Zinnia stood still, her boots sinking slightly in the soft dirt. "Why bring me here?" "Because you needed somewhere safe." "And now what?" Nevan looked at her. "That is up to you." She helped him unload the saddlebags. That night she helped cook the beans. By the time the stars came out, she was sitting next to him on the porch, their shoulders almost touching. He did not touch her. She did not ask him to. But she looked at his hands, rough from work, not from greed. After a long silence, she said, "My father put my name on that debt. I was 19, I never saw him again." Nevan turned toward her. "You did not deserve that," Zineia blinked fast. "I thought maybe I did for a long time." "You did not," he said again, firmer. She looked at him, truly looked. "Why are you really alone out here?" He hesitated, then said, "I trusted the wrong people once, then I stopped trusting anyone." Zineia studied his face in the firelight, and now his eyes met hers. "Now I think maybe I was wrong." The next morning she was already in the garden, sleeves rolled, weeding between the rows. Nevan came out, surprised. She glanced up. "I do not like doing nothing," he smiled just a little. As the days passed, Zineia did not stay in the cabin. She worked. She helped mend the fence. She cooked with him, not for him. And Nevan never treated her like she owed him anything. One evening, as they split firewood, she said, "You never asked me if I planned to leave." Nevan leaned on the axe handle. "I figured you would tell me when you knew," she nodded. "I do not want to leave." He looked at her, long and steady. "I am glad," she stepped closer, "but I do not want to owe anyone anything ever again." "You do not," he said. "You are free." Zineia reached up and touched his face. "Still. If I stayed, I would want it to mean something." Nevan took her hand in his. "It already does," and when he kissed her, it was not rushed. It was quiet, sure, and real. Zineia closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt safe. They stood there, under the big Montana sky, and neither one of them moved for a long, long time. The first frost came early that year, brushing the meadow grass silver before dawn. Zineia stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight against the cold, watching mist rise off the horse trough. The mare shifted in the corral, tail flicking. Somewhere behind her, Nevan stirred the stove to life. He didn't speak when he passed, only handed her a mug of chicory coffee. She took it, fingers brushing his. He lingered a moment longer before stepping outside with the axe slung over one shoulder, leaving her alone with the warmth and the silence. Later that morning, she knelt by the hearth, mending a tear in her skirt when the sound of hooves broke the rhythm of the wind. She rose slow, thread still looped through the needle, and stepped out to find a wagon bouncing up the trail from the south. Nevan stood near the woodpile, arms still. His eyes narrowed. The wagon creaked to a stop. A man in a battered hat climbed down, wiping his palms on his trousers. His beard was gray, his boots newer than the rest of him. "Nevan Jude?" the man asked. Nevan nodded once. The man's gaze drifted to Zineia. He tipped his hat, polite but distant. "Name's Boyd Kersey. I'm with the new land office outside Virginia City. There's been some confusion about boundary markers up this way." Nevan stepped forward, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. "What kind of confusion? Your claim's still solid, but there's surveyors coming through next week. Just wanted to give you warning." Land's shifting hands with all the new cattlemen pushing north. Zineia listened without a word. Nevan's jaw had tensed. Boyd cleared his throat. "Also heard some talk in town. Banker Ellery White's hinting at trouble. Says you interfered in lawful business." "He lied," Zineia said, voice even. "What he did wasn't lawful." Boyd's eyes flicked to her. "Not my place to say, miss, just passing word along." Nevan stepped between them. "We're fine. You can tell the surveyors I'll be waiting." Boyd nodded, climbed back onto the wagon, and turned the team around without another word. When the dust settled, Zineia looked at Nevan. "He'll come back, I know," her voice lowered. "Does it change anything?" "No," he said, "but it means we stay ready." She looked down at her hands, still holding the needle and thread. "I don't want to go back into town." "You won't," he said. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than usual. The walls had held her safely for weeks, but now the memory of that platform in Red Bluff pressed against her chest. She sat by the stove, hands idle, until Nevan came in and crouched beside her. "There's a place west of here. Old homestead I used for trapping in the winters. We could ride out, stay a spell, keep away from whatever Ellery's stirring." Zineia met his eyes. "Would you leave the cabin behind?" "I built it with my hands," he said. "But I'd walk away if it meant you stayed free." She reached for his wrist, fingers light. I won't run again, but I'll ride beside you. By dusk, they'd pack supplies into saddlebags: flour, beans, cured meat, a tin of lamp oil. Zineia tucked the mended skirt into her bundle. Nevan wrapped the rifle in canvas. They rode out before sunrise past the cottonwoods along the bend of the Madison. The trail narrowed, climbing into pine country where the air smelled of sap and the sky opened wider. The second cabin sat tucked against a slope, its roof bowed slightly, but the door still swung true. Nevan dismounted first, circling the structure with sharp eyes, checking for animal sign or rot. Zineia waited until he nodded. Inside, she swept out the dust and opened the shutters. The light fell in long gold lines across the floor. It was quieter than the other place, as if the trees held their breath. That night they sat close by the stone hearth, knees almost touching. The fire cracked but didn't roar. Zineia watched the flames for a long time before she spoke. "When I was little, my mother kept a garden," she said. "She used to say if you want to grow something good, you have to stop digging it up to check if it's ready." Nevan didn't answer right away. Then, "She sounds like someone who knew how to wait." Zineia turned her head. "Are you waiting?" "I'm learning," he said. She leaned forward and for the first time pressed her lips to his temple. He closed his eyes. The fire burned low, and outside the wind moved through the trees like a hush. The weather turned colder with each passing day, pushing the wind down from the high ridges and into the valley where Nevan's second cabin lay. Snow hadn't come yet, but the scent of it rode the air, sharp as pine needles. Zineia could feel it in her joints when she carried water from the spring, in her fingertips when she peeled potatoes near the open window. She'd begun carving notches into the beam above the hearth, one for each day since they'd left the first cabin. There were 12 now. Each one felt like a step further from the girl who'd stood silent on the auction platform. Nevan returned late that evening with a brace of grouse slung over his shoulder, his coat damp from frost and his eyes darker than usual. "Tracks by the bend," he said, resting the birds on the table. "2 riders, maybe 3 days old." Zineia rinsed her hands in the basin and dried them on her apron. "Could be trappers." They weren't trapping, no snares, just passed through slow like they were looking. She drew the shutters closed without a word, then lit the oil lamp. Nevan untied his scarf, shook out the snow. "If they come back, we'll hear them. You think it's Ellery?" "I think he's too proud to forget what happened in Red Bluff." She watched him clean the grouse, his movements methodical. "Tell me about your brother." Nevan paused, then wiped his hands on a cloth. "His name was Caleb. He was younger by 2 years, quieter than me, used to carve animals out of driftwood when the river was high." Zineia sat down across from him. "How did he die?" "Stampede." "Spring roundup near Fort Benton. Horse spooked and he never got clear." She didn't fill the silence that followed. She let it sit between them, honest and unhurried. Nevan finally looked up. "He was the reason I stayed out here. After he died, I needed the quiet." "You still do," he studied her face. "Not the same way." Later, after the fire had burned low and the wind pressed against the shutters, Zineia slipped her hand into his beneath the quilt. His fingers curled around hers without hesitation. "I don't want to keep waiting for someone to take this away," she whispered. "They won't," he said. "I want to build something here, not just hide." "I know." She turned toward him, the warmth of his body steady beside her. "Then let's make it ours, not just yours, not just safe." "Ours?" He brought her hand to his lips, kissed the back of it slow, then let it rest against his chest. "We will." The next morning, after breakfast, Nevan handed her an old ledger from a chest near the stove. "Caleb and I kept records of the land. Where the good grazing sat, where the soil held best. I was thinking we start again, together." Zineia flipped through the pages, faded ink and neat handwriting. "You trust me with this," he nodded. "You're not just staying here. You belong here." She set the ledger down and reached for the pencil. "Then we'll need a second garden come spring, and a smokehouse." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. By the 5th week, they'd enclosed the porch to trap heat, and Zineia had sewn wool linings into their coats from an old Hudson's Bay blanket tucked in the trunk. Nevan showed her how to set deadfalls along the north slope and taught her how to read elk tracks by the shape of the dewclaw. One night, while she stripped dried apples into a sack, he returned from the woods with a small iron box in his saddlebag. "Found this buried near the first cabin years ago," he said, setting it on the table. "Forgot about it until now." Inside were old coins, a yellowed letter, and a brooch shaped like a swallow. Zineia ran her thumb over the pin. "Swallows always find their way back." Nevan met her gaze. "So do people, with time." She reached for his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." His fingers tightened around hers. "You're home." They stepped outside together, their breath clouding in the night air. Snowflakes drifted down, slow and soft, settling over the roof and the fence rails. Zineia leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "We'll be ready for whatever comes." He wrapped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "We already are." And as the snow gathered in quiet layers, the cabin stood warm behind them, and the land wrapped itself around their new life like it had been waiting for them all along. The snow deepened by mid-December, blanketing the hills in silence. The trees stood heavy with it, the limbs bending low, and the trail that wound down to the river had vanished beneath drifts that rose past Zinnia's knees. The cabin held steady, warm with their breath and the low crackle of the stove. She'd taken to rising before dawn, lighting the fire while Nevan slept, and wrapping herself in his old wool coat before stepping outside to gather kindling. The mornings were so still she could hear the wings of birds overhead, the rustle of deer in the brush beyond the clearing. One morning, she came back inside with her skirts damp and her cheeks pink from cold. Nevan was sitting at the table, sharpening his skinning knife. He looked up, and something in his gaze stayed longer than usual. "You always move quiet," he said. Zineia set the wood down beside the stove. "I used to pretend I was invisible. Easier that way. You're not invisible here." She rubbed her hands together, then crossed the room. "What were you like before you came out west?" He smiled, but it was faint. "Restless. I tried too hard to prove things no one asked me to." She sat beside him. "What changed?" "I lost more than I meant to." He set the knife down. "And then I found something worth being steady for." They didn't speak after that. The quiet between them wasn't hollow, it held something. Later that day, Zineia stepped into the lean-to behind the cabin and sorted through the crocks and sacks on the shelves. She had started keeping track of their stores on a scrap of parchment nailed above the door. Enough flour for a few more weeks, beans holding fine, lard half gone. She touched each item with care, measuring not just weight but time. By the end of the week, the wind changed. A dry bite came into the air and the sky turned pale. Nevan came in from hunting with a small piece of folded canvas in his hand. "Found this caught on the fence line." Zineia took it, fingers brushing over the faded navy cloth. "Looks like coat lining." "Wasn't mine." He poured water into the basin and washed his hands, his shoulders tight. Zineia turned the cloth over. "Could be from one of those riders, could be closer than we thought." That night they didn't light the lamp. Instead, they sat in the dark with only the fire's glow, listening. The sound of the wind through the trees, the occasional creak of settling wood. Zineia sat on the floor, back against Nevan's legs, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I used to think quiet meant something bad was coming," she said softly. He shifted just enough to lean closer. "And now I think it means something's holding." When the knock came 2 days later, it wasn't loud, it was the kind of knock meant to be heard but not mistaken for force. Nevan opened the door with the rifle in hand, barrel low but ready. A woman stood there, wrapped in a shawl, boots worn, her eyes sharp beneath a loose braid. She looked past Nevan and found Zineia, who had stood from the table. "You're Zinnia Valler," Zineia nodded. The woman stepped closer. "Name's Myra. I was in Red Bluff. I worked in Ellery White's house. I saw what happened that day." Zinnia's throat tightened. "Why are you here?" "I left his place 6 weeks ago, took my boy and walked out before he could sell us both. I heard you were up this way." "I thought maybe," she glanced behind her, where a small figure stood in the snow, no more than 6 or 7, bundled in a patchwork coat. Maybe there was room for one more. Nevan stepped back without a word. Zineia crossed the room and opened the door wide. Inside, Myra unwrapped her son's scarf and helped him out of his coat. He clung to her legs, silent, watching everything with wide eyes. Zineia kneeled. "You hungry?" He nodded. She handed him a biscuit from the tin near the hearth. He bit into it with both hands. Myra's voice was quiet. "I didn't know where else to go." Zineia looked at her. "You're here now, that's enough." Nevan stoked the fire higher, then turned to Zineia. "We'll build another cot. I'll check the roofline tomorrow. Make sure it can hold the weight." Zineia nodded, her eyes catching his, full of something firm and certain. That night, once Myra and her son had gone to sleep on the bedroll near the stove, Zineia and Nevan sat on the porch, wrapped in one quilt. "She's brave," Zineia said. "You are too." Zineia looked out at the snow-covered trees. "I don't feel afraid anymore." "You don't have to." She turned toward him. "I want to marry you." He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Then we will." A soft wind moved through the branches overhead. Inside, the fire crackled, steady and low. Zineia rested her head against him. "We're not hiding anymore, we're building." Nevan kissed her temple. "It's ours now, all of it." Above them, stars burned through the cold sky, bright and clear. By early February, the snow softened along the edges, and the days stretched longer, the light lingering like it had something to prove. Zineia stood by the window with a scrap of muslin in her lap, coaxing stitches through a hem for Myra's boy, who'd outgrown his trousers 2 weeks earlier. The child, Amos, sat cross-legged near the hearth drawing shapes in the ash with a stick, humming tunelessly. From outside came the slow grind of a saw. Nevan was nearly finished with the small lean-to they'd added for storage, built with lumber he'd hauled from downed pine along the ridge trail. His shoulders had grown broader with the work, his movements more certain. He moved like a man who knew exactly where his life began and ended now. Zineia tied off the thread, folded the trousers, and turned to Myra, who was kneading dough on the table. "You ever think about staying longer?" Zineia asked. Myra didn't pause. "I already have." Zineia ran her fingers along the folded hem. "Folk like Ellery White don't forget when you run. They forget quicker when you're not afraid of them anymore." Zineia watched the light fall in soft stripes across the floorboards. "You think we're far enough out now?" "No such thing as far enough," Myra said quietly. "Just close enough to something better." That afternoon, Nevan came back from checking the traps with a fresh cut along his forearm. A sharp rock had caught him when he slipped crossing the frozen stream. Zineia cleaned it in the wash basin, her touch gentle but sure. "It's shallow," she murmured, pressing a strip of clean linen against the wound. "But you'll need to rest that arm a few days." Hard to rest with new roof beams waiting, she looked up at him. "They'll wait." His eyes searched hers. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" "I do." "What does it look like?" She tied the bandage snug. "It looks like a stove that doesn't need stoking till morning, a child who sleeps through the night. A man who never makes me wonder if he'll come back." Nevan reached for her hand, resting it against his chest. "Then that's what I'll give you." The words weren't promise so much as intention, planted like something that would grow if tended right. By March, the land began to wake. Sap ran in the trees, and the hens, long silent, started laying again. Zinnia and Myra turned the soil behind the cabin with spades Nevan had sharpened for them. The ground damp and stubborn but willing. One morning, Zinnia found Nevan sanding a piece of black walnut smooth. He didn't look up, but his voice was clear. "I'm building something for you." She brushed wood shavings from the bench. "What kind of something?" He set the wood aside and took her hand, leading her to the edge of the clearing where the sunlight touched the first green shoots near the rocks. There, tucked beneath a tarp, was a frame made of hand-cut cedar. A cradle. Zinnia stared at it, her breath catching. "You knew. I heard you get sick mornings. You touch your belly sometimes without noticing." She laid her palm gently across her middle. "You're not afraid?" He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I've never been more sure." They married beneath the warming sky, with Myra standing beside Zineia and Amos holding the rings tied in a strip of muslin. Nevan wore his brother's coat, brushed clean and mended at the cuffs. Zineia wore a dress dyed soft blue with boiled indigo she'd found in Myra's satchel. They spoke no vows beyond what they already lived. After, they shared bread and honey and coffee brewed in the iron pot. The wind moved through the trees, and the earth just barely began to smell like spring again. Nevan carved her name above the hearth beam beside his brother's. Not over it, beside it. The past still mattered, but it didn't own him now. By late June, the garden had taken root, and the hens had chicks under their wings. The lean-to held sacks of flour and jars of early preserves. Amos had a carved wooden horse Nevan made him, and Myra had started teaching Zineia to read by lamplight, one page at a time. On a warm night, Zineia leaned back against Nevan's chest beneath the stars while Amos slept inside and Myra embroidered by the fire. "I used to think peace was something that happened to other people," she said. Nevan's hand rested over hers, their fingers laced. "You made it. You gave it shape. I don't ever want to leave this place. You won't have to." She turned her head, kissed him slow and certain. "Then this is home." And it was. The following spring, the baby came just before the snow melted for good. A girl, strong, lunged, and stubborn, born with Zinnia's dark hair and Nevan's quiet eyes. They named her Lark, after the bird that sang before the sun on warm days. Zineia wore her in a sling while tending the garden, and Nevan carved a second cradle just in case. Myra planted herbs along the porch, and Amos learned to fish with a line made from horsehair and patience. They never saw Ellery White again. Word came through a trader that he'd lost his holdings and moved south, chasing rail money. Neither Zineia nor Myra spoke his name after that. Some men became ghosts you didn't need to bury. Years passed. The cabin grew, board by board. Another lean-to, a loft, a stone path from the porch to the smokehouse. They built it all together with hands that remembered how to take hurt and turn it into shelter. Zineia kept the ledger now, her handwriting steady. Nevan taught Amos to read trail signs, and Myra taught Lark how to stitch a straight line. In the evenings, they sat on the porch as the sky turned gold, and Nevan would take Zinnia's hand, her palm calloused like his, and hold it like he had that first day without demand or fear. They were never rich. They were never idle, but they were whole, and they were free.